Welcome to the Raw Materials Podcast by Merit Coffee. Here we cover more detailed topics about origin, coffee sourcing, and coffee production.
I'm Jamie Isetts. I'm the director of green coffee for Merit Coffee, and I'm here with Taylor Cowan from Spirit Tea. Spirit supplies all of our Merit cafes. I wanted to kind of have this chat with Taylor about tea buying versus coffee buying. So, Taylor, can you introduce Spirit?
I'm Taylor Cowan. I'm the co-founder of Spirit. So Spirit started about 5 years ago, and when we started, we had a really strong focus with sourcing. And that sounds silly because for wine or for coffee at this point in the U.S., you would say, "Oh, well, of course, the people who are bringing this to the market are the most important chain in the supply link." But from having worked in tea for 7+ years, I can tell you that at a lot of companies at the time that we started this did not have an emphasis on sourcing. The work that we do is essentially presenting the work of people at origin who are making great tea. I guess I'll kick that back to you. Do you know the whole history of Merit's sourcing program?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wasn't a founder at Merit, but I came on about a year after we started sourcing as the green buyer.
Mhm.
So, really, I've built the sourcing program kind of from the ground up in line with the values that were already in place with the company. Working more directly with producers really does deliver a better quality coffee to our customers. It's a personal focus for me, but I think Merit has proven to be community focused, and we try to extend that to our global citizenship as well. So,
I know coffee works. There are sort of green buyers usually who will buy green coffee and bring it and sell it in the United States. And then roasters will create the finished product. And in tea, we have less supply links in theory. Once tea is produced at origin, it is a finished product. So what we're buying is complete. If somebody buys from Miss Wen, as we do, and they buy the exact same lot, then we have the exact same tea in practice. But the tea market is littered with middlemen. Unfortunately, these middlemen are never direct about where they get their tea from. The prices are unbelievably inexpensive to the point where it makes you question how much they purchased that product for and how much they're valuing the work of the people producing the tea. And they don't add very much to the tea dialogue. And we've actively sought to cut out those middlemen.
not only do we contribute value in the roasting process, the difference is that a coffee farmer really couldn't sell me finished green coffee even if they wanted to in most cases, just because of the economies of scale and the investment that you need to kind of peel back the different layers of the coffee cherry to get to that green seed. You have to have those other links in the chain just to get a usable product, not even to ensure quality. I think about it less as like cutting out middlemen and more about having accountability for each part. I've had situations in the past where like I really like working with the producer, I really like working with the exporter, but for example, the dry mill where another layer comes off to make the coffee ready for export, I haven't been happy with that piece and I have to find a new person to work with. I think it's right to focus on the producers because they're often the most disenfranchised piece in the chain, especially if I want to work with small farmers in developing countries. I really need people on the ground, but I definitely expect them to be communicative with me, to not withhold information. I don't like need to know their exact margins
Right.
or anything. But a lot of the people who I work with closely convey that information to me anyway because they know that they
Right.
contribute value to my supply chain.
I know one of the big calls of sourcing direct is to learn from the people producing tea and making the entire agricultural miracle occur at origin. Going to origin is a sign, I think, not only of humility of us accepting that, hey, like we are still learning. We are always learning about this, and we will never stop. Um, but also respect for the people making it. And in T's case, there's almost no way to learn a lot of these things. There's a great drought of resources in English on tea's history, its cultivation, its ritual, and certainly still a drought of scientific literature. For us to go, it's to learn, to see, and to build relationships as well. Let's shoot over to you. When you go to Origin, what is that experience like? Because you go pretty frequently. Like, what does it feel like when you're there? What is the trip? How long is it? Who do you stay with?
Different green coffee buyers do it differently. I travel to coffee growing regions for about 2 weeks, once a quarter.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. I'm usually traveling just when they're finishing up their harvest and they're getting ready for export. So I'm seeing like the last bits of actual coffee harvest and production, and also, seeing the mechanics of the coffee quality control happening and logistics happening. Of course, Latin America is a huge part of my travel, but I do get to go to East Africa sometimes. I've been to Indonesia for coffee sourcing before, but I'd say like broad generalizations like tropical mountains being in developing countries, and really just trying to approach it with a beginner's mind because there's just so much you don't know. Like I'm very reliant on the people who host me because I rely on them to know the context of what's
Mm.
going on to keep me safe, and nothing too crazy has ever happened to me. But
Right.
yeah, it's in the air sometimes.
When you go, do you have a wish list? Do you have, this is what I need to come back with, or is it more so open ended and you figure it out as you go along?
So I like to use travel to reinforce and gather information versus actually like executing contracts and like trying
Mhm.
samples and then being like, I'm going to buy that. Usually it's like I discuss way in advance, like what I'm looking for. So they kind of do have a wish list for me. And then when I visit, we'll focus on those particular copies, which could mean visiting those particular producers or maybe following up on a project from the harvest before. Maybe we need to get on the same page on some quality stuff. Just kind of like problem solving together. And I mean, sometimes there's just really no substitute for being there. Even the people who you can communicate like the best with, more and more, like as I revisit places, it's more about just leaving open space to learn
Yeah,
things that
exactly.
I didn't know that I needed to learn.
Your wish list that you mentioned that you send before you go, is that based on what Merit's customers want? Is it based on the direction Merit decides they want to go with their sourcing projects that year? Or how does that work?
It's a holistic consideration of those two things, really. So we want to source coffees that our customers like, but we also want to consider why they like them. They're pretty in sync, I feel like. For example, the biggest coffee that we source that's by far our most popular coffee, Andino Leal, is also like our most one of our most in-depth sourcing projects.
I mean, I think that there's a mixture always of discovery and grocery list. I mean, that was certainly the story of one of our breakfast teas, Black Gold. We already had a breakfast tea, but
Yeah.
because everything just aligned so well with that, we made the decision on the fly and said, yeah, sure, let's give it a try. And sure enough, it really has resonated with our customer base. So,
Yeah, I
uh,
mean, we use it for all of our black iced tea, so
yeah.
yeah, it's really
and
which is
I,
quite a lot because it's pretty hot in Texas. So, I mean, to be a little bit more specific, like I definitely have different. I like to think of them as tiers or like places within my lineup. Like I have my coffees that really need to be more approachable coffee flavors, need to be more of an everyday drinker. I have my segment of what we do that's like more niche and needs to be more
yeah.
exciting and interesting. There's exciting things that you can do in each area. And one of the things I really like about working with you guys actually is that you understand that the foundational stuff needs to have a strong story and a strong intention too.
No, totally. And when we're sourcing for our highest selling bracket, certainly like we approach that with the amount of care as we do our very singular and limited lots. Certainly when I'm there, I feel a lot of pressure on the days I spend with the producers of these tier and bracketed teas because there's a lot of business involved behind this.
It's kind of a totally different story with our base tier. When we are buying for something that someone can enjoy every day at a reasonable price point, that actually provides us more opportunity to work with the smallest farmers. Actually, like I find working with those types of like that tier to be just as exciting as working with the super innovative top tier stuff. Usually, what we do is We use the baseline tier as kind of like a way to bring people into the program, because we have a
Yeah.
little bit more flexibility. And, like if it's not stunning, shocking flavors, it's okay. It's compelling in a different way.
Is it worth it to tend to a relationship by buying a bulk amount of something which scores well but not great?
I think it's absolutely necessary. Let me give you an example. So we work with this farm in Guatemala called Finca La Senda. I have a friend who's a consultant for them, but they just used to sell
Yeah.
their cherry to a local cooperative. Like they weren't even processing it to the next level, which is where many
Right.
farms in Guatemala sell it, right? They decided we're going to go all in. We're going to build a wet mill and we're going to sell parchment and we're going to produce specialty. That's like traveling light years.
Mm.
Like, to do that from
Yeah.
one year to the next is so much. But after looking at some of the infrastructure they had built, I was like, all right, we'll try out a little bit of the coffee his first year and we'll see how it goes. And it was good, really impressive for their first year
Mhm.
producing specialty, but it wasn't like mind blowing that first year. The second
Mm.
year, this past harvest that we worked with it, was out of this world.
Hmm. Yeah.
Do you have anything like that? Do you ever do that?
Like the scaffolding
Investing in
effect?
somebody, yeah, investing in somebody who maybe has good quality now because you think they're gonna have great quality later.
I think it's a little bit less in tea. They are going to produce at whatever quality level they are already producing at, and we're not dictating what they produce. And I think that is a very crucial difference between coffee and tea
Yeah,
buying is that
huge difference.
tea producers are making for a market which is largely domestic. The market's built in already. For the most part, it just is what it is, and we have to find it.
What you're saying is that tea is definitely more of a seller's market, and I'd say coffee is more of a buyer's market.
Yeah, like I was saying, one of the essential difference to me that I've noticed until very recently, most of the demand for tea came from the very country of origin where it's produced. I mean, I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me, but I know Japan is something like 98% of tea never leaves the Japanese archipelago that they produce. Korea is 99%, and I think China is 90%, and China is still the world's largest exporter of tea. And it's amazing. So, mostly what we do when we're there buying tea, essentially convincing people to sell to you. I guess another part of the paradigm is that tea, unlike coffee, is pretty much shelf stable, and especially in China, where people love aging tea and don't drink black teas until a year off harvest, or white teas until 3 years off harvest. Um, we, of course, need our menu for that year. So the producer always has a good idea of how much that tea is worth. But part of the business exchange, especially in China, is them sort of testing you to see if you know how much it's worth. And I don't think we realized this at first either. We were, of course, were, I think the first buying trips I saw were just sort of like so sheepish and saying, well, we wouldn't dare haggle with them. Like, of course, it's probably worth that because otherwise they wouldn't say that. And, it's not a very, like, I think Chinese business is a lot more relationship based and a lot more haggle based. And that in order for them to understand that you know what you're talking about, you have to counter haggle. And that creates respect. I was just in Japan this last spring, and there's a lot less of that. Japan, I think literally 3 or 4 times I would get handed a menu and they would just be like, here are my prices.
Yeah, definitely like the cultural consideration, of price negotiation and quality perspective and stuff comes into play with coffee too. But because we're dealing with completely different parts of the world, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's really interesting. And I mean, doing business in Guatemala is so much different than doing business in Peru, for example, or Colombia. You want to find a way that you can communicate with each other where whether you're actually speaking the same language or not, you're on the same page.
Yeah, precisely. And the first several years I went, I took a interpreter, and we would go and just drive through the various regions and go to these appointments. It's so important. And interpreter is not just often from English to Mandarin, but also English to Mandarin to the regional tongue. It's that level of translation plus avoiding cultural faux pas, whether it's off price offering or haggling or who eats first. Yeah, without an interpreter, I would be lost sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I definitely have those same challenges with coffee buying, But again, because it's kind of a buyer's market, there's
Yeah.
subtle adaptation on the parts of the producers and the supply chain partners to maybe make me more comfortable. There's that similar bending going on. It's just bending the other way.
One of my funniest things I got told to was to stop thanking people. I'm just like a nice Midwestern boy, and I was raised to always say thank you no matter what happens. And my interpreter had to tell me, "Stop! You're offending. You're making people feel uncomfortable." That was something I would just never have guessed. Even though mostly what we're doing is convincing people to sell to us in the first place, when we're there, it really does make quite a difference in the relationship already. I think that most producers, especially many of the producers we buy from, have never sold to the United States or to Canada or anywhere in the West. You can see the moment where their eyes light up and they say, "Wow, I had no idea." Jamie, you probably get to see it in customers, uh, interact with
So
customers
cool.
directly.
It's so
Um,
cool. When I had the opportunity to work for Merit, one of the things I was most excited about was being a green buyer for a roaster retailer. Sometimes I just love being a fly on the wall in our cafes and seeing people. It's always cool to see somebody really geek out about it. But
yeah,
what really, really makes me happy is when somebody asks for a specific coffee just because they tried it and they like it. And they're like, oh man, Andino Leal, it's my favorite. It's my go to. Really what I strive for is just to have the people who come into our cafes and buy the coffee and drink the coffee, like I want them to be able to look at what we're doing and look at our marketing and be like, wow, they look like they're doing a good job, and then like verify and be like, wow, they really like go even more above and beyond than I thought. I'm not only doing it for the customer who knows everything about what I do already. Like I take the most joy out of seeing the extremes of the supply chain. So like yes,
yeah,
of course, like it's an amazing experience to get to go be on a coffee farm and travel to some of these places, especially now at this point, most of these people are my friends, but also like seeing people interact with this thing. Yeah, I find it just as interesting. And the thing is like communicating that experience to a producer is kind of the same as communicating to a customer about coffee production. I spend a lot of time, thinking about how to communicate the retail experience to the producers as well. And the producers who I like working with who really, really get it, like they're interested in that in the same way that the customers who really get it are interested in, how the coffee's grown. So it's kind of a neat
yeah.
exchange to be a part of. At this point, like we mostly use your, most basic program, but even
Sure.
those teas are just like above and beyond, like on a totally different level than like the kind of like black tea you would encounter at, your average.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that's kind of the design, is that I think we literally call our base level teas the new standard, because we want to have something that is accessible, even if it is way more expensive than commodity grade. A good way to think about it is that credit where credit's due. We are the gallery, but the producers are the artists. And what importance does a gallery have? Well, a lot. I mean, it's one place you can come and encounter this specific choice of pieces of feelings and emotions. But the artists are the artists, and that is their work, and we wouldn't have a gallery without them. So again, transparency is like, it'd be like hanging a painting in a gallery and not attributing the artist to it at all, and just saying,
Yeah,
"Oh
for
yeah, I like
sure.
that one."
There really is a lot of importance in being in the gallery. We never would
Mhm.
have been able to show our customers about ethical tea sourcing
Yeah,
without your communication about it.
I think that like a great thing that a gallery can do, sort of emulsifying big concepts and making them a little bit easier for the public, and just saying, "Hey, like, you're ready for this, and I can make a great cup of tea and put it across this counter. All you have to do is drink and enjoy."
The last thing I want to do is like bring something beautiful to the table and not be able to share it with people. I want everybody to try my coffee.
Yeah,
Like if they don't see the value that you do in that product, then
yeah,
like I think it's your responsibility to show them like why it's special. Yeah, I mean, you guys are really like doing the hard work right now where like not only do you have to provide a beautiful product, but also like tell people why they're incredible. And that's That's a real challenge. It takes a lot of work.
So for us, like the hard work is just on the ground. It's just constantly getting in front of people and finding where tea is served in the United States and playing to those
Yeah.
customers.
Sometimes I feel that it's important to use those maybe more dramatic profiles as a tool for people
Mhm.
to, again, like have a scaffolding to sort of build into the things that you have to offer, because there's no curriculum, I guess you could say. That sounds really pedantic, but like it's not fun if you taste
Mhm.
two different vodkas, for example, and you can't tell the difference between them, and someone sits there and tells you,
Yeah.
well, this one's the best vodka in the world and this one is water.
I think there should be levels. I don't know. You hear people talk about the first time they have a natural coffee or the first time that they have one of our wild Assamese black teas from Taiwan. And people remember that, and it makes them challenge the way that they were thinking previously. Ultimately, people need to take that journey for themselves, and there needs to be something that inspires them to do so.
Okay,
Right.
so climate change.
So it's definitely a factor everywhere we go. In fact, like in that new Craft Ruby White post, I talk about there's an unusual monsoon in Taiwan that wiped out one of Mr. Lin's earliest farms, and there were some 100-year-old trees there. It wasn't like they had just clean cut and planted saplings. This over and over again, we're seeing cases where it's like just freak weather. I don't imagine that we're in as bad a place as coffee. Certainly, tea has a lot less natural pests, funguses, diseases, and I know that climate change is exacerbating some of those things. Could you speak to coffee in general?
Yeah, like differences in precipitation. So coffee is very dependent on rain coming at a very specific time, because everything starts when
Sure.
the coffee plants flower, and they flower right after a period of heavy rain. But it's like very, very sensitive. It has to be come in a very specific way. So the more
Wow.
like spread out and unpredictable that rainfall is, the less you get those neat sort of concentrations of harvest. Basically, it's pretty bad for the health of the plants if the farmers aren't prepared for it. And then of course, having new environments for the plants creates an opportunity for fungi like Roya, for example, coffee leaf rust, to come to prominence in regions where it normally wasn't common. So, like, even though people in some parts of the world are really well prepared to deal with that particular pest, like some of the people who have been affected by it in the last 5 or 10 years were in no way ready for that. For example, some places that traditionally only had one major harvest or one exporting harvest are now starting to have two harvests, because the staggered rainfall throughout the year means that there's going to be staggered cherry
Yeah.
production and eventually coffee export. It creates a real stress on the demand for manual labor, because coffee is very labor
Mhm.
intensive. When the harvest is more spread out, you have to employ more people over a longer period of time. Like the cash flow in agriculture is very based on timing, and
Yes.
climate change has really just completely warped that timing, and just like your whole schedule.
Places that couldn't historically produce tea now suddenly become good tea producing regions,
Yeah.
and that's bizarre because I think what like sunlight and sun exposure are very important to tea. It's really what limits the upper north and south growing regions of the plant. So to see it all of a sudden thriving in places that have the correct sunlight but not necessarily the correct climate is just really bizarre.
Mhm.
Specifically, like areas that previously had too cold of a winter
Mhm.
are not having those winters anymore, so they can grow tea
Oh,
outdoors.
do you see a lot of your producers moving towards other types of crops or diversifying because of that?
I'd say
Tea has a much longer life cycle as a plant, like for production, than coffee does, right?
I don't know coffees, but tea, if it's seeded, grows indefinitely. It produces well for about 80 years.
A tree will continue to grow and stuff, but it's pretty well accepted that like it's most productive between 7 and 20 years. And then there's a whole discipline of tree renovation where people like stump the trees and do different things, and
Yeah.
a lot of but there's a lot of regeneration. We've seen a lot of diversification, and I like to encourage people to diversify just because it's better for
Oh,
the health of
yeah,
their
exactly.
business as a farm. But because there's that shorter life cycle, it's easier for farmers to switch to another crop, not just in a way where it's like okay, I want to have a more balanced business, but in a way where it's like coffee's not working for me because the climate doesn't work for coffee here anymore. So I'm going to start planting avocados or something.
And tea, like I think less so. But that said, I know a lot of them are inveighing against monocultures. The new craft Ruby White, for instance, he has cacao plants between the rows of tea. When I went last year, or it was already 2 years ago, 2 years ago to China, we went to a place called Yiwu in Yunnan, and she walked us through these groves of trees that were like 80 to 120 years old. And as we walked back, we just stopped in this like little like ravine, and she just harvested baihua, like wild flowers.
Recently, I was traveling in Oaxaca in Mexico, which is one of my favorite areas of the world to source in. And this isn't a project that we're buying from just yet. It was kind of just like an introductory meeting, but there was this group I visited that is basically doing sustainable agroforestry with coffee as part of it. So they were also producing like vanilla, cocoa, and
Whoa.
citrus trees and a couple of other things. I'm like,
Uh,
okay, now I'm gonna source vanilla.
yeah.
Like, I love that kind of stuff. Do you find that most of the producers that you work with in tea understand their cost of production?
Yes.
I mean, that sounds like a really simple question, but that's not the case in coffee.
Really, like of labor and of
I mean, they
like
know what it
equipment.
costs, but they don't have like it's not common to have a well organized system for managing your business in that way, especially like really small farmers. There's also like not a culture of business education around this. Many of them, like, they literally don't know whether or not they're making a profit. It's been a big industry focus over the last 5 years in coffee, trying to determine cost of production because it's kind of tricky. Like
Mm,
it's not as straightforward as you would think. Sometimes they don't know whether it's sustainable for them or not. If I'm investing all of this time and energy into building a sustainable supply chain and it's not really sustainable, that's not good business practice for me either.
what they answer may be different than what they feel comfortable telling you.
Right.
There's all kinds of levels to that interaction. I guess like and every situation is a little bit different. You know, from where we source our matcha, that is a family owned business that, you know, I'm sure has every bit of their, you know, labor per hour calculated and, you know, the cost of the machine and everything built in. And it's a very well oiled production to where we source the crescent green from, which is literally just a village that comes together and makes that tea each year. It is one of many importances of going.
So, what tea should I try that y'all have right now?
Well, of course, I'm going to say the new craft, the ruby white that you're trying.
I'm actually drinking some right now. Totally looks like whiskey in this glass.
This is the farmer that Jordan and I first ever met when we went to Origin. So it is like a full circle. I love it, and it's a great gateway tea.
Have to agree with you. Well, this was
Yay.
awesome, Taylor. Thank you so
Yeah,
much
thank you.
for outlining this and setting it up. Had a really great time.
Yeah,